At exactly 11:42 p.m., Betty realized she wasn't getting home that night. 8 men stood between her and the door. She was 23 years old, and no one was coming to help. The music from downstairs had faded to a muffled bass line that seemed to match the pounding in her chest. Her phone was on the table across the room, might as well have been a mile away. She'd walked into this house 2 hours ago, laughing, trusting, believing tonight would be like any other Saturday. Now, standing in that upstairs bedroom with the door clicking shut behind the last person to enter, Betty understood with terrible clarity that some nights don't end the way they begin. What happened next changed her life forever. Before we continue, comment below where you're watching from. This story needs to reach people everywhere. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Betty's story isn't just about what happened to one woman on one night. It's about the warning signs we all need to recognize, the red flags that hide in plain sight, and the strength it takes to survive when the world feels like it's collapsing around you. Betty Martinez was 23 years old that autumn. She'd moved to the city 8 months earlier, driven by dreams that felt both enormous and achingly specific. She wanted to work in graphic design, maybe start her own studio someday. She'd spend her lunch breaks sketching in coffee shops, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, completely absorbed in whatever she was creating. Her roommate, Sarah, would later say Betty had this way of making everyone feel seen. She remembered your coffee order, asked about your sick cat, noticed when you got a haircut. Betty trusted people easily because she genuinely believed most people were good. She'd grown up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, where your word meant something and neighbors looked out for each other. That trust had served her well for 23 years. On September 16th, it nearly destroyed her. Nothing about that day warned her what was coming. Betty woke up at 7:30 that morning to sunlight streaming through her apartment window. She made coffee, spent an hour working on a freelance logo design, texted her mom about coming home for Thanksgiving. She went to the gym, grabbed lunch with Sarah, spent the afternoon cleaning her apartment and catching up on a Netflix show everyone had been talking about. It was aggressively, beautifully normal. Around 9 p.m., her friend Marcus texted asking if she wanted to come to a party. Marcus worked with her at the marketing firm where she'd landed her first real job 3 months ago. He was dating someone in their office, seemed safe, seemed normal. The party was at his friend's house, he said. Casual, just some people hanging out. Betty almost said no. She was tired, had plans to wake up early Sunday and go to the farmer's market. But Sarah encouraged her. You need to get out more, make more friends in the city, Sarah had said. You can't just work and go home forever. So Betty changed into jeans and a green sweater, put on minimal makeup, grabbed her keys and phone. She texted Marcus she'd be there in 20 minutes. Later, investigators would say there were warning signs, red flags that might have changed everything if someone had known to look for them. But in the moment, Betty saw none of them. She was 23, ambitious, hopeful, and she believed that Saturday night was just another night. The house sat on the east side of town, in a neighborhood that teetered between up-and-coming and run-down. Tree-lined streets, older homes with wraparound porches, the kind of place where young professionals rented rooms while they figured out their lives. Betty parked on the street at 9:47 p.m. She could hear music thumping from inside, saw shadows moving past the windows. She texted Marcus that she was outside. He appeared at the door moments later, grinning, beer in hand. "Come on in," he'd said. "Everyone's here." The house was more crowded than Betty expected. 20, maybe 25 people packed into a living room that felt too small for that many bodies. The air was thick with competing cologne scents, beer, and something else she couldn't quite place. Hip-hop played from a speaker in the corner. People were laughing, shouting over the music, holding red Solo cups. Marcus introduced her to a few people whose names she immediately forgot in the chaos. She grabbed a beer from the kitchen, found a spot against the wall, and tried to look like she belonged. For the first hour, everything seemed fine. Betty talked to a girl named Jennifer who worked in HR somewhere downtown. She laughed at jokes she only half heard. She felt the pleasant buzz of alcohol warming her from the inside. Around 11 p.m., a guy named Tyler started talking to her. Mid-20s, athletic build, confident in a way that bordered on aggressive. He kept refilling her beer without her asking. She noticed, but didn't think much of it. People were friendly at parties. That's what you did. The music got louder. More people arrived. The living room felt claustrophobic. Tyler suggested they go upstairs where it was quieter, where they could actually hear each other talk. Marcus was in the backyard. Jennifer had left an hour ago. Sarah was home, probably already asleep. Betty hesitated for just a second, but Tyler seemed harmless. The party was packed with people. What could happen in a house full of witnesses? The upstairs hallway was dimmer, quieter. Betty could still hear the party below, the bass line vibrating up through the floorboards, but the noise felt distant now, like something happening in another world. Tyler led her to a bedroom at the end of the hall. It was cleaner than she expected. A queen bed with a navy comforter, a desk with a gaming setup, posters of bands she didn't recognize. 3 other guys were already in there, sitting on the bed, standing near the window. Tyler introduced them, Jason, Mike, Chris. They all seemed to know each other. Betty felt a flutter of unease in her stomach, but pushed it down. She was being paranoid. They were just hanging out, just talking. But then someone closed the door. The click of the latch was soft but definitive. She turned to see 2 more men had come into the room behind her. One of them leaned against the door. The other sat on the desk. The atmosphere shifted so subtly, Betty almost missed it. The jokes stopped. The smiles changed. Someone turned off the overhead light, leaving just a lamp in the corner, casting shadows across half the room. Tyler offered her another drink. She said no thanks. He insisted. She insisted back. The room felt smaller now, the walls closer. Betty counted the men again. 6 of them. 1 of her. Her phone was in her back pocket, but when she glanced around the room looking for an excuse to check it, she caught Mike staring at her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Where's Marcus?" Betty asked. Her voice sounded too loud, too bright. "He left," Tyler said. "His girlfriend wanted to go." Betty's stomach dropped. She thought about the door, wondered if she could get past the guy leaning against it, wondered what she'd say, that she was being paranoid, that she was rude for leaving so abruptly. 2 more men entered. The door shut again. 8 now. Betty's hands started shaking. She tried to laugh, tried to make it seem like she wasn't scared. "I should probably be getting going too. I have an early morning." None of them moved. Tyler stepped closer. "You just got here," he said. "Stay a while." And that was the moment Betty knew this was no longer a misunderstanding. Something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. Nobody downstairs would hear her if she screamed. Her phone might as well have been on another planet. Marcus was gone. Sarah didn't even know which house she was at. The men in the room were strangers except for Tyler, and looking at his face now, at the cold calculation in his eyes, Betty realized she'd never really known him at all. They'd moved like a pack, coordinated without needing to speak. Later, detectives would confirm they'd done this before, had a system, a method. But Betty didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that she'd trusted the wrong person, accepted the wrong invitation, ignored that tiny voice in her head that had told her to go home. Later, investigators would say there were warning signs. But in the moment, Betty saw none of them. None of them looked like monsters. That's the part people struggle to accept. They looked like someone's coworker, someone's friend, someone you'd pass on the street without a second thought. That's what makes evil so effective. It rarely announces itself. It invites you upstairs. It offers you a drink. It smiles while plotting your destruction. What happened in that room would take minutes to do and a lifetime to survive. Betty tried to run. Jason grabbed her arm. She tried to scream. Someone's hand clamped over her mouth so hard she tasted blood. She fought. She kicked. She clawed at arms and faces, but there were 8 of them. Her resistance was a minor inconvenience, a brief delay before the inevitable. At some point, Betty couldn't remember exactly when, her mind did something unexpected. It left. Not literally, but psychologically. She was still there, still in that room with those men, but part of her consciousness simply floated away to somewhere safer. Psychologists call it dissociation, a survival mechanism the brain employs during trauma too overwhelming to process in real time. Betty found herself staring at a water stain on the ceiling, analyzing its shape, wondering absently how it got there. She heard the men talking but couldn't parse their words. She felt pain, but at a distance, like it was happening to someone else. Time became elastic. Seconds stretched into hours. Hours compressed into heartbeats. She stopped fighting when she realized it only made things worse. She stopped crying when she realized they enjoyed it. She simply endured, her mind building walls around the horror, compartmentalizing it into something she might be able to survive remembering. When it was over, though over seems like the wrong word for something that never really ends, the men started leaving the room one by one. Some avoided looking at her. Others seemed proud. Tyler, the first one to approach her at the party, the one who'd seemed so friendly, so safe, pulled out his phone. "Don't tell anyone," he said. "No one would believe you anyway. You came here willingly. You drank. You came upstairs. What do you think that looks like?" Betty didn't respond. She couldn't. Her voice had become a stranger to her. After they left, Betty lay on that bed for 17 minutes. She counted the seconds on the digital clock near the door, focusing on the numbers changing because it was the only thing that felt real. Her clothes were scattered on the floor. Her body felt foreign, violated, no longer entirely hers. The party continued downstairs. Music still played. People still laughed. The world kept turning as if nothing had happened. And maybe, Betty thought, maybe nothing had happened. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe she'd done something to deserve it. Maybe she'd sent signals she didn't realize she was sending. The lies abusers tell their victims became the lies Betty told herself, because accepting the truth that she'd been brutally assaulted by 8 men who'd planted, executed it, and would likely face no consequences felt impossible to bear. When Betty finally stood up, her legs barely held her. She dressed slowly, each movement deliberate, mechanical. She found her phone on the floor by the bed, screen cracked from where it had fallen during the struggle. She had 3 texts from Sarah asking how the party was. She didn't respond. Betty walked down the stairs as the last few partygoers were leaving. No one seemed to notice her. No one asked if she was okay. She walked past the living room, past the kitchen, out the front door into the cool September night. The air felt sharp in her lungs. She walked to her car, got in, locked the doors. She sat in the driver's seat for 20 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Surviving didn't feel like winning. It felt like carrying a secret too heavy to speak, a burden that would reshape every moment of her life moving forward. The drive home was a blur. Betty remembered stopping at red lights, remembered the route, but not the experience of driving itself. She moved on autopilot, her mind partially dissociated, still protecting her from the full weight of what had happened. She got to her apartment at 1:34 a.m. Sarah was asleep. Betty walked past her roommate's door, went into the bathroom, and locked herself in. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She wanted to shower, to wash away the smell of them, the feel of their hands, but some part of her remembered reading somewhere that you weren't supposed to shower after an assault if you wanted to report it. Were you supposed to report it? Would anyone believe her? What happened in that room would take minutes to do and a lifetime to survive. If this story is already affecting you, pause for a second and comment justice below, because what happened next shocked even investigators. Betty's story represents thousands of untold stories, thousands of people who've walked out of rooms like that one, carrying secrets they never asked to keep. The question isn't just what happened to Betty, it's what happens next, when the party's over and the witnesses are gone, and the only evidence is the word of a victim against the denials of her attackers, when the burden of proof falls on the person who's already lost everything, when survival is just the beginning of the fight. Betty sat on her bathroom floor for sunrise. She didn't shower, she didn't sleep. She just sat with her back against the cold tile wall, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the darkness outside her window gradually lighten to gray. Her body was in shock, shaking despite the apartment's warmth. Her mind kept trying to process what happened and failing, like a computer stuck in an infinite loop. Around 6 a.m., Sarah knocked on the bathroom door. "Betty, you okay in there?" Betty's voice, when she found it, sounded like it belonged to someone else. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine. She wasn't sure she'd ever be fine again. But fine was easier to say than the truth. Fine required no explanation, no vulnerability, no risk of judgment or disbelief. Betty emerged from the bathroom and went straight to her bedroom. She told Sarah she wasn't feeling well, maybe had too much to drink. Sarah accepted this explanation without question. Why wouldn't she? They'd been roommates for 8 months. They trusted each other. Sarah had no reason to suspect the woman standing in front of her had spent the last 6 hours being destroyed. Betty lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The water stain from the other house kept superimposing itself over her bedroom ceiling. She couldn't escape it. Couldn't escape the smell of that room, the sound of their voices, the feeling of complete helplessness. She wondered if Tyler was at home sleeping peacefully. She wondered if any of them felt guilty. She wondered if this was the first time they'd done this. Deep down, she knew it wasn't. The coordination had been too smooth. For 3 days, Betty barely left her bedroom. She called in sick to work. She ignored texts from friends. She ate only when Sarah forced food on her, claiming she was worried about the flu or food poisoning or whatever Betty claimed had made her sick. Sarah believed the lies because that's what good people do. They trust. They accept explanations at face value. They don't imagine the darkness hiding behind closed doors. On day 4, Betty forced herself to shower. The water felt like acid on her skin. She scrubbed until she was raw, trying to erase the memory of their touch. It didn't work. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. That night, Betty searched online for information about sexual assault. She read statistics that made her feel sick. 1 in 6 women. Underreported, difficult to prosecute, victims often blamed. She read stories from other survivors, women who'd been through similar experiences, some who'd reported and regretted it, some who hadn't reported and regretted that. There was no right answer, no path that led to healing without passing through hell first. Betty created an anonymous account on a survivor forum and typed out her story for the first time. It took her 2 hours to write 3 paragraphs. She deleted and rewrote sentences dozens of times, trying to find words adequate for something that felt beyond language. When she finally posted it, the responses came quickly. "We believe you. It's not your fault. You're not alone." Betty cried for the first time since that night. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that. From relief. Relief that someone believed her before she'd even said it out loud. Relief that she wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't imagining the weight of what had happened. Surviving didn't feel like winning. It felt like carrying a secret too heavy to speak, and Betty had no idea if she'd ever be strong enough to put it down. 2 weeks after that night, Betty finally told Sarah what had really happened. They were sitting on the couch watching TV when Sarah made a joke about Betty meeting someone at that party. Betty's reaction, sudden tears, visible shaking, made Sarah realize immediately that something was very wrong. Once Betty started talking, the words poured out. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face cycling through shock, horror, anger, grief. When Betty finished, Sarah hugged her for a long time. "We need to report this," Sarah said. "We need to make sure these men face consequences." Betty wanted to. Part of her desperately wanted justice, wanted to see Tyler and the others punished for what they'd done. But another part of her, the part that had read all those statistics and survivor stories, was terrified of not being believed, of being interrogated about her drinking, her clothes, her decision to go upstairs, of having her entire life examined and judged while her attackers got to remain anonymous, innocent until proven guilty. Most people don't report immediately. Trauma doesn't work on a schedule. The brain's response to overwhelming horror isn't linear. It's messy, contradictory, often illogical from an outside perspective. Betty had spent 2 weeks trying to convince herself it wasn't that bad, that she could just move on, that reporting would only make things worse. But with Sarah's support, with the validation that what happened to her was real and wrong and not her fault, Betty found a fragile kind of courage. On October 3rd, 17 days after the assault, Betty walked into the police station. The officer at the desk asked what she was there for. Her voice shook when she said she wanted to report a sexual assault. The officer's expression didn't change. He handed her a form on a clipboard and told her to fill it out. "Have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Betty sat in a plastic chair in the waiting area for 42 minutes. She counted the seconds again, like she had that night, anchoring herself to something measurable when everything else felt chaotic. Other people came and went. A man reporting a stolen bicycle, a woman asking about parking tickets. Betty's assault was just another item in a queue. Finally, a detective called her name. Detective Maria Rodriguez, mid-40s, kind eyes, tired posture. She led Betty to a small interview room, offered her water, sat down across a table that felt simultaneously too close and too far away. Betty told her story for the second time. It was both easier and harder than telling Sarah. Easier because she'd practiced, because she knew now that she could speak these words aloud and survive them. Harder because Rodriguez needed details, specific times, names, descriptions. Had she screamed? Had she tried to leave? Had she been drinking? How much? What was she wearing? The questions were necessary for the investigation. Betty understood that intellectually, but emotionally, each question felt like a small accusation, like she'd failed some test by drinking, by going upstairs, by not fighting harder. Rodriguez seemed to sense Betty's discomfort. "I know these questions are difficult," she said, "but I need to ask them. I believe you, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but we need a complete picture to build a case. Do you still have the clothes you wore that night?" Betty nodded. She'd kept everything, sealed in a plastic bag in her closet, just in case. Rodriguez explained the next steps. Betty would need a medical examination. Even though it had been over 2 weeks, they'd still check for any evidence. She'd need to provide a formal written statement. They'd need to identify the suspects, which meant Betty would have to look through photos, potentially participate in a lineup. Betty felt overwhelmed by the enormity of it. This wasn't going to be quick or easy. This was going to be a long, painful process with no guarantee of success. But what choice did she have? Staying silent meant Tyler and the others could do this to someone else, had probably already done it to others before her. Betty scheduled the medical examination the next day. She gave Rodriguez the names she knew, Marcus, Tyler, and descriptions of the others. She answered every question as completely as she could, even when the answers made her feel exposed and vulnerable. When the interview finished, Rodriguez walked Betty to the door. "You did the right thing coming here," she said. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you did." Reporting didn't bring Betty the relief she'd hoped for. If anything, she felt worse. The act of recounting everything in such detail had forced her to relive it, to see the images in her mind with perfect clarity. She cried on the drive home. She cried that night. She cried the next day during the medical examination, which felt invasive and violating in its own way. But she'd started the process, and some part of her, buried beneath the fear and shame and trauma, was proud of herself for that. The investigation moved slowly, frustratingly slowly. Detective Rodriguez contacted Marcus first. He claimed he'd left the party early, didn't know anything about what happened to Betty. When pressed about Tyler, Marcus said he barely knew him, just a friend of a friend. Tyler proved harder to locate. The house where the party happened belonged to someone named Derek Chen, but Chen claimed he'd been out of town that weekend and let his roommate host a party. The roommate, when questioned, said he didn't know anyone named Tyler. It was like watching a carefully constructed wall of silence form, each person protecting the others, denying knowledge, providing alibis that were just plausible enough to make prosecution difficult. Meanwhile, Betty was still trying to live her life. She went back to work but couldn't concentrate. Her boss noticed, asked if everything was okay. Betty said she was fine. The lie was becoming automatic. She stopped going out with coworkers after work, stopped responding to invitations. Her world contracted to just her apartment, her office, and occasionally the grocery store when Sarah dragged her there. She was too afraid to be around men she didn't know, too afraid of being in situations where she might be vulnerable. Her therapist, Dr. Lisa Chen, whom she'd started seeing 2 weeks after reporting, explained this was normal. Your brain is trying to protect you. It's creating barriers to keep you safe, but those barriers can also keep you isolated, can prevent you from healing. Betty wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting to be believed, and that fight was exhausting in ways she'd never imagined. 6 weeks after Betty filed her report, Rodriguez called with an update. They'd identified 4 of the 8 men. Tyler Grant, 26. Jason Reeves, 24. Michael Chen, 27. Christopher Davis, 25. All had been brought in for questioning. All had denied Betty's allegations. Tyler claimed Betty had come to the party drunk, had flirted with him, had consensually gone upstairs. The others claimed they'd been in a different room, hadn't seen anything. It was her word against theirs, 8 against 1. And without physical evidence, the medical exam had been too late, any DNA long since washed away, the case came down to credibility. Would a jury believe Betty, or would they believe 8 men who claimed she was lying, who'd portray her as a woman with regrets, looking to blame someone else for her bad decisions? The district attorney's office was hesitant to prosecute. Rodriguez called Betty to explain. "I'm sorry," she said. "They don't think we have enough evidence for a conviction. They're worried about how it will look in court, your delay in reporting, the lack of physical evidence, the conflicting stories." Betty felt like she'd been assaulted all over again. "So they just get away with it?" she said. "That's it? They destroy my life and nothing happens?" Rodriguez's silence was answer enough. Betty hung up and screamed into a pillow. She'd done everything right, reported, cooperated, provided every detail they'd asked for, and it still wasn't enough. But Rodriguez didn't give up. She continued investigating, looking for other victims, other patterns. She interviewed people who'd been at the party that night, pressing them for details, inconsistencies in the suspect's stories. And then, 3 months after Betty's assault, another woman came forward. Rachel Martinez, 21, reported being assaulted at a party in the same house 8 months earlier. Her story was eerily similar to Betty's. Same group of men, Same method, same playbook. Suddenly, the district attorney's office was interested again. One victim's word against 8 perpetrators was difficult. 2 victims with nearly identical stories, that was a pattern. That was prosecutable. And if there were 2 victims, there were probably more. Rodriguez reached out to other young women who'd been to parties at that house over the past 2 years. She found 3 more willing to come forward, each with stories that mirrored Betty's and Rachel's. The investigation shifted. What had been a weak case of he said, she said became a strong case of serial predators with a documented pattern of behavior. In January, 4 months after Betty's assault, Tyler Grant, Jason Reeves, Michael Chen, and Christopher Davis were arrested and charged with multiple counts of aggravated sexual assault, kidnapping, and conspiracy. The 4 others involved in Betty's assault were still being investigated, but the core group, the organizers, were now in custody. Betty was relieved, but the fight was far from over. The trial didn't happen until the following September, nearly a year after Betty's assault. The prosecution built their case methodically, presenting testimony from Betty, Rachel, and 2 other survivors. Expert witnesses explained trauma responses, why victims often delay reporting, why their stories might have inconsistencies. Physical evidence was limited, but the pattern was damning. The defense tried every tactic. They questioned the women's credibility, their drinking that night, their decisions to go upstairs or trust the defendants. They painted their clients as good guys who'd made mistakes, young men with bright futures who shouldn't have their lives ruined over misunderstandings. But the jury saw through it. When you have 5 women with near identical stories about the same group of men operating with the same method, it stops being a misunderstanding. It becomes clear criminal intent. On September 24th, after 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on most counts for all 4 defendants. Tyler Grant received 35 years, Jason Reeves received 30 years, Michael Chen received 28 years, Christopher Davis received 25 years. The sentences varied based on their level of involvement, their criminal histories, and specific charges. The 4 other men involved in Betty's assault received lesser charges and sentences, some as accessories, others as accomplices. All would serve time. All would be registered sex offenders for life. Betty sat in the courtroom when the verdicts were read. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just felt a profound, exhausted sense of closure. It wasn't the happy ending she'd imagined as a child, where everything went back to how it was before. Her life would never be what it was before that September night. But the men who'd assaulted her would face consequences. They wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. That mattered. After the sentencing, Detective Rodriguez hugged Betty outside the courthouse. "You did it," she said. "You got justice." Betty nodded, but getting justice and getting her life back were 2 different things. 2 years after that night, Betty is still healing. Some days are better than others. Some days she wakes up and the trauma feels like a distant memory, something that happened to a different version of herself. Other days, it's fresh and raw, and she has to fight to get out of bed. She still sees Dr. Chen weekly. She's learned coping mechanisms, grounding techniques, ways to manage the PTSD that became her constant companion after the assault. She's learned that healing isn't linear. You don't just get better. You learn to carry your trauma in a way that doesn't destroy you. Betty eventually left her job at the marketing firm. Too many memories of Marcus, of that party, of the person she'd been before. She started freelancing full-time, working from home where she felt safe, where she could control her environment. Her design work became a refuge, a place where she had complete control, where she could create beauty out of nothing. She reconnected with Sarah, who'd stood by her through everything, the investigation, the trial, the aftermath. Sarah asked Betty if she regretted reporting. Betty thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," she said. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but knowing those men are in prison, knowing they can't hurt anyone else, that matters. That means something." trauma doesn't disappear. Betty still has nightmares, still feels panic in crowded spaces, still has moments where a certain smell or sound or shadow triggers a flashback so vivid she forgets where she is. But she's also found strength she didn't know she had, the strength to speak up, to demand justice, to keep living even when living felt impossible. Betty started volunteering at a sexual assault crisis center, taking calls from survivors who needed someone to talk to, someone who understood. She knows she can't save everyone, can't undo their trauma or guarantee them justice, but she can listen. She can believe them. She can remind them that surviving is itself a kind of victory. Strength doesn't mean forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't affect you. Strength means continuing to exist, continuing to grow, continuing to believe in the possibility of joy even after experiencing profound horror. Betty has that strength. It wasn't given to her. She earned it through every impossibly difficult day, through every moment she chose to keep fighting when giving up would have been easier. They tried to silence her forever. Instead, her story now speaks for millions. Betty became an advocate, a voice for survivors who weren't ready to use their own voices yet. She speaks at colleges about consent and bystander intervention. She works with legislators on improving laws around sexual assault reporting and prosecution. She turned her worst experience into a mission to ensure fewer people have to endure what she endured. That's not to say the assault made her stronger or better. That's a lie people tell to make trauma more palatable. The assault destroyed parts of Betty that she can never get back. Her innocence, her trust, her sense of safety in the world. But from those ruins, Betty built something new, not better than what she had before, different, scarred, but still beautiful, still worthwhile, still her. Betty's story illustrates patterns that survivors and their allies need to recognize. Warning signs aren't always obvious, but they exist. A group of men coordinating to isolate someone, offering drinks repeatedly when someone declines, moving someone to a secondary location away from witnesses, creating barriers to exit. These are tactics predators use, and recognizing them can save lives. Consent is clear, enthusiastic, ongoing, and can be withdrawn at any time. Going to a party is not consent. Drinking is not consent. Going upstairs is not consent. Flirting is not consent. The only thing that equals consent is explicit, unambiguous consent, and even that can be revoked. Trust doesn't equal safety. Betty trusted Marcus. She trusted that a house full of people meant she'd be safe. She trusted that her instincts were paranoid, not protective. Predators exploit that trust. They seem normal, friendly, safe. That's how they operate. Most assaults are committed by someone the victim knows in places that seemed safe. Why awareness matters is simple. 1 in 6 women will experience sexual assault in their lifetime. Men are victims too, though less frequently. The trauma ripples outward, affecting families, communities, entire social networks. But awareness, education, and believing survivors can break the cycle. When we teach young people about consent, when we intervene as bystanders, when we believe victims who come forward instead of questioning why they didn't scream or fight or report immediately, we create a world where Betty's story becomes less common, where predators know they won't get away with it, where survivors know they'll be believed and supported, where healing is possible. Betty wants people to know several things. First, if you've experienced sexual assault, it's not your fault. Nothing you wore, drank, said, or did makes you responsible for someone else's decision to violate you. Second, reporting is your choice. No one should pressure you either way. Some survivors find justice and closure through the legal system. Others find peace without ever involving police. Both paths are valid. Third, healing takes time. There's no timeline, no checklist, no moment when you're suddenly okay again. Be patient with yourself. And finally, you're not alone. Millions of survivors exist in this world, many of them thriving despite their trauma. If they can do it, so can you. Now, I want to ask you something. How does Betty's story make you feel? Do you see yourself in her? The trust, the hope, the belief that people are fundamentally good? Do you see people you know in Tyler and the others? Men who seem normal, who blend in, who hide their darkness behind friendly smiles. And here's the harder question. What would you have done if you were Betty? Would you have reported? Would you have fought through the investigation, the questions, the trial? Would you have found the strength to not just survive, but to help others survive? Think about that, because Betty's story isn't unique. It happens every day in every community, to people you know, even if they've never told you. The only difference is Betty fought back. She refused to let her attackers define her story, and in doing so, she became something they never expected. Not a victim who disappeared into silence, but a survivor whose voice echoes louder than their denials. Evil doesn't always break in. Sometimes it invites you inside. It smiles at parties. It offers to help. It seems safe right up until the moment it isn't. That's what makes it so dangerous. And that's why Betty's story matters. Not as a cautionary tale about avoiding parties or distrusting people, but as a reminder that when the worst happens, survival is possible, justice is possible, healing is possible. If this story taught you something, share it. Subscribe for more real stories told to protect, not exploit. And if you're a survivor, please hear this. You are not alone. You are believed. You are valued. What happened to you was not your fault, and your story, when you're ready to tell it, matters just as much as Betty's. Betty wants you to know something else. The number for the National Sexual Assault Hotline is 800-656-HOPE. That's 800-656-4673. They're available 24/7 for anyone who needs support, resources, or just someone to listen. You don't have to go through this alone. Help exists. Hope exists. And survivors like Betty prove that life after trauma, while different, can still be meaningful, beautiful, and worth living. Comment below if this story affected you. Tell us where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, because awareness saves lives, belief saves lives, and survivors speaking up, demanding justice, refusing to be silent, they save lives too. Betty saved lives. Maybe in sharing her story, she'll save yours too.